In this module, we will talk about cognition and perception. First, we will talk about cognition, or your thinking, and then we're going to discuss some of the ways your thinking or cognition can change, as well as some tips and strategies that might be helpful for you and your family or caregivers. Cognitive challenges can interfere with safety, productivity, independence, and relationships. And this can be frustrating for both you and your family or care providers. There are many different ways your cognition can be impacted. The first area we're going to talk about is attention. After a stroke, your attention can change. You may have a short attention span. You may be easily distracted. You may have a hard time focusing, and you may need more time to finish a task. Tips for attention can include things like finding a quiet space to limit distractions, focusing on one thing at a time, and taking your time. Some caregiver tips for attention include provide the person with extra time to complete a task and give them short, simple instructions. After a stroke, you may have trouble with orientation. You may forget you are at RVH. You may think the year is 1975, and you have difficulty keeping track of time. Some tips for orientation can include using a checklist for daily activities, using a calendar and crossing off the days, using digital devices to assist in tracking time. Some caregiver tips for orientation can include help the person establish a daily routine and do the same thing at the same time of day. Talk about the date and where you are in conversation with the person. Use a bulletin board for important information. And your family or friends are welcome to bring pictures of your loved ones to the hospital to post in your room. A person who cannot pay attention to new information cannot store it in their memory. Memory problems can affect one's ability to learn new information and carry it over to everyday tasks. Some tips for memory can include using a memory aid, such as a journal, a timer, or a calendar. Repeating the information to yourself and storing items in the same place. Some caregiver tips for memory include repeating the information to the person, using signs or pictures as memory cues. After a stroke, you may not know where to begin a task, or you may do things in the incorrect order. For example, you may attempt to put on your underwear after your pants, or put on your socks after your shoes. Use a checklist to cue sequencing of a task and break tasks into small steps. Some caregiver tips for sequencing include give clear step-by-step instructions, help the person plan the task, and give the person time to practice the task. Recognizing the problem involves insight. We will discuss this a bit later in this module. Tips for problem solving include breaking the tasks into smaller steps, practice solving problems with word and number puzzles. Some caregiver tips for problem solving include give verbal cues. help the person identify different ways of solving the problem. A lack of insight may lead someone to perform unsafe actions. For example, they may not recognize that a weak leg makes it unsafe to walk alone, or standing to shower instead of using a bath seat when you have poor balance. Some caregiver tips for insight and judgment include: post reminders. Make the environment as safe as possible. Gently remind the person about the stroke and the resulting limitations, and provide supervision when needed for safety. Impulsivity is acting quickly without thinking things through, or acting on sudden urges. For example, someone may make a comment without considering the consequences of the comment, or they may move too quickly without having things set up the way that is needed to make sure the situation is safe. Some tips for impulsivity include dividing the tasks into small steps and complete one step at a time, and make sure the environment is as safe as possible. Some caregiver tips for impulsivity include: encourage the person to slow down. Give them clear and specific instructions. Perseveration means you may be unable to move on to the next activity or thought. Examples can include repeating the same topic of conversation and having difficulty being redirected to another topic. Some caregiver tips for perseveration include changing the topic of conversation or activity. Distraction can also help to move a person onto a new task. If you need to take a quick break, just pause the video for a few minutes. We are now going to discuss perception, as this can also be impacted after having a stroke. Perception is how your brain tells your body what is going on around you. Your brain uses your senses. Perception challenges can make it hard to make sense of your environment. Your vision can be affected in several ways after a stroke. It can be double vision, partial loss of vision in one or both eyes, blurred vision, difficulty seeing contrasts, or loss of a visual field like a blind spot. Some tips for visual perception include turning your head from side to side to look at the whole room. This is called the lighthouse strategy. Use signs to label rooms to find your way. For example, putting a sign on your bedroom door that says bedroom. With sensation, what your body can feel can change. When something touches you, it may feel different, or you may not feel it at all. For example, hot water may not feel hot to you. Some tips for sensation include: look at how your body is positioned. You may not feel if your body is positioned uncomfortably. Check your skin for red marks. For example, you may not feel if your shoes are done up too tight. Adjust your hot water heater to a safe temperature. Spatial relations is estimating the space around you. For example, the height of the steps or the distance between objects. Some tips for spatial relations include: make the environment as safe as possible. Tape the edges of the table, chairs, or stairs to make a point of reference. Make sure you can feel the seat of a chair before you sit. Unilateral spatial neglect is lack of awareness of one side of the body or the environment. This means that someone may shave one side of their face, may only eat food from one side of their plate, may not be aware of a person approaching them from one side, may not pay attention to one side of their body, and may bump into walls or doorways on one side. Some tips for unilateral neglect include: draw a bright line on the left side of the page when reading. Touch or massage your affected arm. Some caregiver tips for unilateral neglect include: sit on the person's affected side when visiting. Cue the person to look right and left, and touch or massage the person's affected arm. Apraxia is difficulty with planning and completing movements needed to do a task, even if you have the physical ability and understanding to perform the task. Messages from the brain to the muscles are not being processed properly. There are several different types of apraxia, and your healthcare team can help to assess how apraxia is affecting you and work on developing strategies. People living with apraxia may have difficulty using an object for its intended purpose, dressing and grooming, following directions, or learning a new task or movement. Your team has assessed how your stroke has affected you and can help you develop individualized strategies. So it's important to discuss your concerns about cognition and perception with the healthcare team, as your healthcare team can help develop strategies to optimize safety and functioning. If you have questions or want more information, please talk to a member of your healthcare team.